So we've already done a video on the overall lore of the Skaven, and we've also done a video now on the High Magic, which is a magic that we know is coming out in Total War Warhammer 2. We don't officially know about the Skaven, but, you know, I don't even know if they really exist. Giant rat people? Sounds like bullshit. But either way, the Skaven in the tabletop have two lores of magic I wanted to go into here today. The Spells of Ruin and the Skaven Spells of Plague. They also have the dreaded 13th spell, which is not necessarily a lore, but only specific players in the Skaven world can take it. So today I just wanted to touch these two lores, what spells are in them, the kind of really cool flavor text behind them, and of course then go into what I feel they're going to be like in Total War Warhammer 2. So everything that I'm saying right now is purely speculative, not really based off of anything outside of some of the spells we've already seen in Total War Warhammer 1, and the way I feel that they might actually be interpreted in Total War Warhammer 2, or at least ways that I hope that they're done. So we'll kind of start off with the Skaven magic as a whole here to talk about. Unlike the other magic lores, there's no signature spell for Skaven. There's no like overarching lore ability either. You know, when you look at stuff like the lore of fire and its kindle flame ability, or you look at the lore of life and its life ability to heal its spells within its radius. So you don't have that with the Skaven lores, period. Instead, though, in the tabletop, certain practitioners of the Skaven dark arts, quote unquote. It's really hard to call them dark arts when you think of Skaven and magic, because they're always so crazy and random, and everything's sort of chaotic. But it's hard to kind of think of them as the conventional spellcaster. You shall not pass. But they're ratmen, so I don't even know what that would sound like as a ratman. But still, there's three real big practitioners of Skaven dark arts. You've got the Grey Seers, the Plague Priests, and Warlocks. And Plague Priests typically choose from the Skaven Spells of Plague. Warlocks choose from the Skaven Spells of Ruin. And then Grey Seers and Vermin Lords, too, as well, can choose from both, as well as the dreaded 13th spell. So rather than being able to choose a signature spell, which is true for their lore as a whole, specific units get what's called a standard spell. And that standard spell, they can say, okay, in tabletop you roll to see which spells you get. Well, if you're a warlock, you roll your spells. Let's say you don't get warp lightning. They can choose warp lightning as their standard spell. For Plague Priests, they can choose Pestilent Breath as their quote-unquote signature spell or standard spell. And Grey Seers can choose Skitter Leap from the Spells of Ruin or the 13th spell. In addition to that, the Vermin Lord can choose the dreaded 13th spell as well. They're the only two people outside of Thanquol, who is a Grey Seer, that can choose the dreaded 13th spell. And we'll go into the dreaded 13th spell. It's a really awesome ability. I can't wait to tell you guys about it. But we'll start off here with the Skaven Spells of Ruin and jumping in with Skitter Leap. With a bamf, the Skaven sorcerer disappears in a puff of smoke to reappear elsewhere on the battlefield. So we have another movement spell, kind of in the line of Walk Between Worlds from High Magic, which we've talked about, that makes the unit ethereal and move a distance. So if we're to see a new line of spells in Total War Warhammer 2, it would make sense if they were movement spells, because this would play into Walk Between Worlds, like I was saying. So it's just the ability to move. In the tabletop, it's to move to the character 12 inches, even if it's engaged in close combat. So it'd be kind of a very interesting way for Skaven, which are supposed to be very erratic and spontaneous, to poof, move very quickly in and out of combat. So it's only going to be used, though, on a friendly infantry character. So you can't use it on a unit. So let's say, you know, your lore is engaged in battle. You've got a warlock somewhere outside of range or somewhere away from your lord. Poop. Who says poop? Boom, you cast Skitter Leap on the commander, and boom, he's out of the combat. So it'd be really awesome to see this mechanic, because we know that Skaven from the tabletop have poor leadership, and they really rely on the aura of their their Skaven Warlord to really help them stay in the fight. So Skitterleap would be a great way to kind of help keep that mechanic balanced by not just Lord sniping here and there. So this way, at least you can use something to get your Lord either in and out of combat to maybe even snipe another Lord, or to get him out of an oncoming or incoming gank. But it's a low-cost spell, so I could see it having a low-cost spell as well. And an overcast ability for it might be something that increases the range in which the spell is castable. Like maybe, let's just say hypothetically, this wouldn't have a direct application, but 15 inches is the range of Skitterleap. Maybe if you overcast it, you can reach further. Or if you overcast it, you can move the target further. So that would be an interesting mechanic as well. But moving on to then Warp Lightning, and this is again the standard spell that Warlocks can choose. And that so what I'm saying by standard spell here is I'm saying it wouldn't be surprising if that was the signature spell that the very first spell that those casters automatically get, just like we have in all the other lores. So Warp Lightning. The Skaven points a fleshy paw and bolts of greenish-black lightning arc outwards. So a pretty cool little spell there. Clearly exactly what it sounds like. It's just strictly a magic missile that actually does a lot of damage. In the tabletop, it's D6 at strength 5, which is very, very strong. So it's a way for Warlocks to do a cheap damage spell and have them be a little more frightening on the battlefield. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a overcast ability on this to maybe make it out stronger, or maybe it gives it an AP characteristic or something of the sort. But a very, very basic spell, very, very common, a little magic missile spell within the lore, something that most lores have as is. Now the next one here is going to be pretty interesting because I think, like Skitterleap, it's going to play into perhaps a new line of spells that we're going to see in Total War Warhammer 2, and again, purely speculative. So, the Howling Warp Gale. The caster gestures twitchingly to the skies, and fierce hurricane gales begin to build until it swirls around the entire battlefield. This spell is very reminiscent to the Storm Banner that Skaven get. And the Storm Banner, it disallows flyers while active, and it in tabletop it's -2 to missile fire. So it infers a missile penalty to oncoming missile combat, or outgoing missile combat, any missile combat in general. So that's very reminiscent to the lore of High Magic's Tempest ability. So something that would, speculative here, something that would be a missile debuff and would also maybe hopefully ground flyers. We're going to see a lot of flyers in Total War Warhammer 2. Skaven, of course, not really having many to bring to the table, but High Elves, Dark Elves, Lizardmen are all going to have a prominent amount of flyers. I mean, we've already seen from the High Elf roster, we're going to have Great Eagles, we're going to have a bunch of different dragons, we're going to have the Phoenixes, and we've heard about the Pterodons that we're going to be seeing in the Lizardman roster as well. So it wouldn't, if we're looking at Dark Elves from the book alone, they've got Harpies, they've got Manticores, they've got Dark Dragons, they've got Flying Pegasuses. So it wouldn't surprise me if we had something that would finally ground flyers, because we don't currently have anything like that in Total War Warhammer 1 that can really kind of help put flyers really on the ground outside of the nets. The nets of, I almost said Amonkhet, but that's Magic the Gathering. But the nets, those are the only things that can really help out here. So it wouldn't surprise me if a lot of these new lores had a lot of ways to bring flyers down. But again, purely speculative. That's what I'm kind of hoping that we see. We might not even see Howling Warp Gate in the game, or Warp Gale in the game. So it's a toss-up, really. Now, moving on here to Death Frenzy. Gesticulating wildly, the caster gifts a unit with a rabid and frothing urge to close and strike the foe. Simply put, this gives up kind of like a souped-up frenzy to a unit, and also hurts the unit. So I could see this being a direct translation right into Total War Warhammer 2, where it grants frenzy to a target unit while damaging it at the same time a little bit. So maybe you want to cast it on some Storm Vermin, which will then, which are the heaviest hitting, pretty much the stockiest unit of the Skaven army, which will then make them frenzy and do a little chunk of damage to them over time or something like that. So I think an overcast capability for this would be something that would just increase the duration overall. I don't think it would make the frenzy stronger or do more damage to them. I just think that overall longer duration. But we've only got 2 more spells really in the spells of ruin, so you're getting a kind of an idea for how this really plays out. It's a pretty hectic lore, and it's very reminiscent to the way we're probably going to see Skaven. They're going to be very erratic. They're going to be crazy on the battlefield, but I think they're going to be a lot of fun for a lot of players, myself included. I'm excited to see how these mechanics play out. But Scorch. The Skaven sorcerer thrusts his paws into the ground while chittering fiery incantations. And pretty easy spell here. It's just going to be a basic blast spell. So something similar to Dwellers or Waking Wood. It's just going to be something that's going to boom, do a huge explosion. In the tabletop, it causes panic. So I would look at that as maybe a minus to leadership for a duration, as well as being a flaming attack ability. So that's, I think, just going to be a pretty simple spell there. Nothing too crazy on it. It's going to be a great way for the spells of ruin, for the Warlocks in specific, to have another damage ability on top of their Warp Lightning. So just a way to really kind of help disrupt the battlefield and to kind of give you that extra edge as far as a minus leadership when with a bunch of armies that are going to have very good leadership. High Elves have good leadership. We've already heard that Lizardmen are going to have outstanding leadership, and then I already know Dark Elves do as well. But maybe some of the other units that they talked about with the Estalian Conquistadors or with the Vampire Coast, that'll help out a lot. Or we're probably going to see maybe some sort of greenskin tribe somewhere in Lustria that'll help out as well against them. But that's Scorch, and now the final spell for the Skaven spells of ruin is Crack's Call, not to be confused with crack cocaine. With the arcane incantations invoked, the Skaven ends by stamping his horrible pinkish rat-like foot, causing the very ground to split asunder. This is a really cool spell because, like I said, in the essence of what makes Skaven, it's very strong but very crazy and random. In the tabletop, you roll 4d6 dice, or die, and those numbers equate to how long of a line you can draw. So basically, you'll take the caster, you'll draw a line from that caster in the amount of inches of that 4d6. And everything within that line has to take what's called an initiative test, or they die outright. The purple Son of Xerius from the lore of Shadow is the same thing in tabletop. It's a vortex. You drop it on a unit, they take an initiative test. If they fail it, they die. So in Total War Warhammer, we see that as an AP vortex that does a lot of damage and moves around the battlefield slowly, just like in tabletop as well, but not as scary as a tabletop iteration. So I'm wondering if Crack's Call, if we're going to see something that would kill something or kill units outright like it does in tabletop, or if we're going to see something that just does AP damage, just like we see with Purple Son of Xerius, but rather than it being a vortex, it'd be a line capability, and with Overcast maybe being the capability to make that line even longer. So that's how I see Crack's Call really panning out here. I would love for it to have the ability to completely kill things outright while kind of OP. I think it'd be really fun just to have Skaven have that one trump card that's just an immediate gib. But we'll get to the dreaded 13th spell, and we'll talk about that gib in a second here. But we'll move on over to Skaven Spells of Plague. And as you guys can see, there's not a whole ton of flavor text for these little spells. In fact, they only really added them in the 7th and 8th editions. In previous editions, it was just the rules. And they're intentionally race general. In the high magic ones, it doesn't say the high elf wizard. It just says the wizard. In the case of these spells, though, you're seeing that these are specific to the Skaven, just like the lores of Nurgle are specific only to the followers of Nurgle. So we'll hear that, in fact, right now. So we'll talk about Pestilent Breath being the first one. And this is, again, a standard spell that Plague Priests can take as their more or less, quote-unquote, again, signature spell. Uttering horrible phrases, the Skaven sorcerer belches forth an impossibly foul cloud. So a very simple breath attack. This would be something that would look like a cone that would attack in front of the caster, and I look at this as probably doing poison damage and AP damage, because in the tabletop, no armor saves are allowed against it. So rather than, of course, it just doing outright killing damage, it would probably have an AP mechanic on top of the fact that it is a poisoned attack in and of itself. Overcasting might increase the damage on this if they do an overcast with it. You know, some spells don't have that overcast, but I could definitely see that being there for Pestilent Breath. Moving on to the next one here. Bless with filth. A foul mist wraps around the weapons of a nearby unit, and the weapons begin to drip with toxic filth. Again, very simple spell here, and I think this is going to have a very simple mechanic. It's either going to give the unit poison and AP, or just poison. It depends on how they want the spells of plague to pan out. Do they want to give them that AP functionality in there or not, or is it just going to be just a simple poison mechanic? It'll be interesting to see how that pans out, because we're going to see a lot more poison in these units in Total War Warhammer 2. Not so much with the High Elves, of course, but Lizardmen are going to have poison units with their skinks, and we're going to see some poisoned attacks from some of the other units in the Lizardmen army. We're going to see some in the Dark Elf army as well, with the Witches and some other units, and we're seeing this clearly a lot. It's going to be very prevalent in the Skaven armies because they have so many units dedicated to just straight up plague monks, plague censer bearers, globadiers. So you've got so many units that are going to have poisoned attacks, and it's going to be very interesting to see how they flavor those poisoned attacks per army, and not so there's not just generic, oh yeah, all 15 of these units do poison attacks in Total War Warhammer 2. I'm very curious again to see how they flavor this. So moving on to the next spell here, Wither. So chanting passages from the Liber Bubonicus, the wizard casts a spell of wasting, shrinking sickness. So pretty easy spell here as well. I look at this as maybe having the ability to sunder armor. In the tabletop, it minuses toughness, so that's a really cool mechanic. So it makes it so things are easier to hit and they're not as stalwart overall. So it could be something that does a sunder armor, minus to defense or minus to melee armor. We're not really sure here, of course, because this is all speculative, but it'd be interesting to see this thing having a very strong effect, because in tabletop it can stack, and if you reduce something's toughness to 0 in tabletop, it's removed as a casualty. So if something has a toughness of 3, like a standard elf would have, you can cast this spell on them 3 times in 3 consecutive turns, and it targets a unit, by the way. That whole unit would die outright. So you can see that the Skaven Lords of Magic have ways to just completely destroy units in the tabletop, but they take time to get there, or they have such an erratic casting or erratic usage that maybe they don't even affect the unit, or it's too far away or something like that. So like, for instance, Crack's Call does an initiative test. Okay, well, if you use that against someone like a High Elf who has a naturally high initiative, they're going to pass it. But if you use it against a lizard man or a dwarf, or heaven forbid ogres, then it just is going to kill them outright. So because their initiative is so damn low, it's good luck to saving on that one. So as you can see from the tabletop, like I was saying, the Skaven have a lot of ways to play against their foes to outright kill them, rather than just wounding them or debuffing them and the such. But that kind of brings me to this next spell, which is pretty cool here, Vermintide. Not to be confused with the game, but Vermintide here. The caster invokes, and many rats answer the call. Simple spell description. Very similar to Crack's Call. It's going to draw a line, and the way I'm just going to read this directly from the book because it's a really cool way to envision this. Place the large round template in base contact with the caster to represent the summoned rats. Move the template in a straight line away from the caster. The template cannot cross impassable terrain or water features. But basically it's saying that you're summoning up a horde of rats in a large circle, and you're sending all those rats in a line in front of you to just devour whatever they come across. So that's a really cool flavor mechanic that the Skaven are going to have here, to have that kind of beck and call of all these minions of rat swarms. They don't do a ton of damage in the tabletop. They do 3d6 strength 2, meaning they don't do a lot of they're not very strong. They don't have I guess to equate this, there wouldn't be a lot of weapon strength. There wouldn't be a high weapon strength, but there'd be such a voluminous amount of attacks that a couple are going to get through. So I could see that coming in here as kind of like a word of death, where you've got maybe an overcast to increase the range on it, and it's going to maybe not completely decimate things, but if you catch things in a line, maybe they're just going to be able to stack so much damage across that line and get so many units that it's going to do a sweeping amount if you can get it just right. So I see Vermintide being a very positional kind of skill shot ability for the Skaven Spells of Plague. We'll move on here to the second last ability, and these two are pretty flavorful. They're pretty fun spells here. So we'll do Cloud of Corruption. The caster releases a stinking blast of diseased fury. So essentially here, I'm thinking that this is going to be an AP damage type spell. It does damage to everything in a radius around the caster. In fact, it's everything within 12 inches, every unit within 12 inches. So depending on what that unit is, though, it's more or less likely to hit. So if it's a friendly unit, it's less likely to hit. If it's a friendly Clan Pestilence unit, it's even less likely to hit. But if it's an enemy unit, you're damn well sure it's going to hit. And it hits on a 2+ to give you an idea. So it's pretty rare that it's going to miss. And no armor saves are allowed. So that's why I'm saying it's probably going to have an AP mechanic. Probably again going to be poison damage, and I wouldn't be surprised if they did something where it's a reduced damage to friendly units, maybe even completely nullified by Clan Pestilence. But it'd be cool just to see like a Plague Priest march in front of a whole army with Plague monks around him and pop this spell and see it just do a crap ton of damage to your opponent. And it's going to do a fair amount to you as well. But just to see that maybe completely collapse a flank because you've overflooded the flank with so many plague-oriented units that the Cloud of Corruption won't hurt your side as much. So it's really going to be cool to see if this mechanic, or if this spell does have the same tabletop mechanic of doing damage to enemies as well as allies, and in different amounts or different likelihoods in this case. But the last spell here is Plague, and this one's pretty cool. The caster unleashes a disease from the Book of Woe. That's WOE, not just like, whoa, oh my god, what a sale. This one's really, really awesome. So the way it really works is units within 18 inches have to take a toughness test. And if they fail, though, they get hit. Pretty easy, pretty simple. But what happens is it can jump around. So if you cast it on a unit and that unit gets hit, you then roll a die and you determine if the spell ends, if it backfires and jumps to one of your own units, because the opponent can then say, because what happens is you roll a dice. If it's a 1, the opponent says, okay, the spell jumps from me to your unit, your unit Skaven player. If it's a 2 to 4, the spell ends. And if it's a 5 to 6, I as a Skaven player would choose, hey, this spell now jumps to that unit over there. And if it jumps to a unit in combat, it infects the whole entire unit. So a ton of damage is done if they fail that leadership test because there's no armor saves. So again, I could see that being an AP characteristic on the damage chart as well. So a really cool way for that to jump around the battlefield. I'm not really sure how they do it though, as far as an actual gameplay mechanic, because obviously there's hidden die rolls like there is in many RPGs and the such and RTSs, but how would they really equate that, you know? Does it jump at random to a unit within X amount of distance and has less likely to jump to one of your units than your opponent's unit? That would be an interesting thing. Does it have a certain percentage chance to jump to a certain unit within a certain range? So going to be interesting to see how they play with that spell, or if they even do it. There are some spells from the other additions that they could mess around with, but really the and someone correct me if I'm wrong here as I kind of check this mid cast here, but I'm pretty sure that there's no real difference in spells in 6th edition, because we didn't get an 8th edition update to Lizardmen. They only went with 7th edition. But as we've seen, Creative Assembly is no stranger to essentially creating their own rules when it comes to when it comes to Total War, because we've seen with Bretonnia, I mean, Royal Pegasus Knights aren't in the game, and in 6th edition they had only one lore. They didn't have two different lores. And Skitter Leap, Warp Lightning, Vermintide, Pestilent Breath, Death Frenzy, and Plague were the spells. So I'm curious to see how they kind of play with Plague, because I can't really go off of a whole ton of different source material here like they can with other races. But we'll bring it now to the coup de grace with the dreaded 13th spell. And remember, this is a spell that only the Grey Seer, Thanquol, and the Vermin Lord can take, because it is game breaking. The Skaven army as a whole has the ability to use warp tokens. How those warp tokens are going to equate to Total War Warhammer is going to be interesting. I'm not sure if they're going to use it like an auxiliary Winds of Magic, or if maybe certain units accumulate them faster than others. I'm really interested to see how they deal with that, because it's a pretty crucial portion of how the Skaven are run, and it's even more important to this spell, because those warp tokens are going to help you get this off, because it's got a high casting ability, or a high casting likelihood of 25 plus in the tabletop. So it means you have to roll with your dice of power 25 plus. What that would probably equate to in Total War Warhammer is it would probably just outright cost you 30 Winds of Magic to do this, because the way it works is, just to kind of break it down how it's described in the book, because it kind of leads itself along. You roll 4d6 dice. Whatever that number is the amount of opponents. Once you choose a unit, there's the amount of models within that unit that turn into clan rats, which is just fucking cool. If you roll more than what the amount of units that are, or the amount of models that are in that unit, the whole unit turns to a unit of clan rats that you then control. If you roll under the total amount, then they just are basically removed outright as casualties. They turn into clan rats, the mutation fails, or their allies look on and kill the rats before they can come to fruition. So you have the chance of taking maybe a low strength unit and completely giving it outright, just like we see with Morgur, and turning it into clan rats. So you can make it into a fodder unit almost immediately. It's like having the ability to summon zombies while at the same time destroying a unit if you get the chance. So I can see this, rather than it having a chance to completely give a full strength unit, it's probably going to be something that under a certain percentage of health, it will work. I wouldn't surprise me too, though, if they added a mechanic that kept it random. If it said something like has a chance to completely give a unit and turn it into clan rats under 75% health, which is a pretty high amount of health. So, or maybe it's relative to the caster's health or something like that. Something where it balances out, where you can't just go all willy-nilly with it right at the beginning of the game, because that's what's going to be like, that's what would make, I guess, the spell kind of game breaking is, okay, the battle starts, armies get closer, and I automatically choose the Blood Knights, and boom, they're all clan rats now. So there's going to have to be some sort of control mechanic in this to keep it from just being an OP spell that you can just pretty much use to target the strongest unit and pop it, more or less. But that is the entirety of the Skaven magic spells in the 7th edition of Warhammer, at least. Like I said, we didn't get one for the 8th edition, so I wouldn't put it past Creative Assembly to make some of their own flavor to fit what they're adding in, or what's coming with Total War Warhammer 2. But hopefully this gives you guys an idea of how the Skaven are going to both play in Total War Warhammer 2, and get you an idea as well as how insane this army is going to be. It's going to be all over the place. It's going to have really strong abilities countered with really weak units here and there, and really crappy leadership. So they're one of those armies that you fear, but also you laugh at the same time. That's always been the kind of crux of this Skaven. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this. There is obviously, if you haven't caught it already, the entirety of the Skaven lore. I'll put that in the end screen at the end here, so you guys can check that out if you need to. Be on the lookout for some more lore videos. We do have other lores we can cover, such as the dark magic that's going to be coming out for the Dark Elves. I'll be covering that, as well as some other goodies in the future here. But thanks for watching here, guys. Don't forget to comment. Please let me know if you guys have some ideas on the way these spells are going to be done in the game. I'd love to hear from some of you bigger Skaven players that have played the Skaven a lot more on tabletop, that can say, you know what, hey, I play Total War Warhammer, I almost said my real name, ItalianSpartacus. Death Frenzy is going to definitely be like this. I really want to hear it. I didn't play them as much in the tabletop, But I've seen how awesome and crazy they can be on the tabletop. So I'm really excited to see how this army pans out. And if you're thinking of this lore video is about the Skaven magic, you're absolutely wrong. Skaven don't exist. This is just the new Lizardmen magic. You should just subscribe to that notion going forward. But thanks for watching here, guys. Don't forget to comment and subscribe, and looking forward to putting out some more videos for you. Have a good one.